Ever wonder how women were punished in medieval times? Did you know shame was considered more effective than physical pain? Number 6. The gossip bridle. Did you ever talk too much and wish you could take it back? In medieval Europe, women didn't have that luxury. The gossip bridle, also known as the scold's bridle or branks, was a terrifying metal contraption designed specifically to punish women who were considered gossips, scolds, or those who spoke out of turn. Imagine having a metal cage locked around your head with a piece of iron or spike pressed against your tongue. That's exactly what the gossip bridle did. If the woman tried to speak, the device would painfully pierce her tongue, causing bleeding and preventing further talking. The first recorded use of the bridle dates back to 16th century Scotland, though similar devices were likely used earlier. Women condemned to wear the bridle would be paraded through town, often led by a chain held by their husband or a town official. Neighbors would gather to mock and throw things at the gossiping woman as she was displayed for public ridicule. In some communities, the woman's husband would be given the bridle to use at home whenever he felt his wife was speaking too much. One particularly cruel aspect of the gossip bridle was its duration. Some women were forced to wear it for days, unable to eat or drink properly, and suffering from painful sores where the metal rubbed against skin and bone. Town records from Chester, England, describe a woman named Jenny Haywood who wore the bridle for 3 consecutive market days in 1655 for utterances against her betters. By the 3rd day, witnesses described her face as swollen and her mouth bleeding profusely. Communities often took pride in their bridles, with some towns commissioning elaborately decorated versions that resembled animal faces or demons. The bridle from Walton-on-Thames in England, which still exists in a museum today, was inscribed with "Chester presents Walton with a bridle to curb women's tongues that talk too idle." Number 5. The dunkings stool. Have you ever been so embarrassed you wanted to disappear underwater? Medieval women experienced this literally. The ducking stool was a chair attached to a long wooden arm, positioned over a body of water, usually a river pond or lake. Women accused of being quarrelsome, scolding their husbands too much, or spreading gossip would be strapped to this chair and repeatedly dunked underwater. The practice began around the 13th century and continued surprisingly late into the 18th century. The ducking could happen anytime, even in winter when waters were freezing. The number of dunkings would be determined by local officials, with some women being submerged multiple times until they nearly drowned. The community would gather to watch and cheer as the accused woman gasped for breath between dunkings. Court records from 1695 in Leicester, England, tell of a woman named Sarah Leake who was ducked 15 times for scolding her neighbors and speaking ill of the parish priest. Witnesses reported she was unconscious by the final ducking and required revival. Despite the potentially fatal nature of this punishment, it was considered mild compared to witchcraft accusations, which could lead to execution. The ducking stool served a dual purpose. It punished the woman while entertaining the crowd. Many towns had permanent ducking stool structures by the water, with some communities charging admission to visitors who wanted to watch the spectacle. The public nature of the punishment was considered essential to deter other women from similar behavior. An account from 1681 describes how a woman named Agnes Smith in Nottingham went to her ducking as boldly as if going to her wedding, yet returned so humbled and cold she never raised her voice to man or woman again. The psychological impact of being publicly humiliated while fighting for breath created lasting behavioral changes in many women who experienced it. Number 4. The shrew's fiddle. Can you imagine being locked in a wooden device with your spouse for days? The shrew's fiddle, also called a neck violin, was a bizarre punishment designed for quarreling couples or women deemed too argumentative. It consisted of a heavy wooden board with holes for the head and both hands, essentially locking two people face to face or restricting a single woman's movement. When used as a couple's punishment, the fiddle forced a husband and wife who couldn't get along to literally face each other, often for hours or even days. They would have to cooperate to eat, move, or perform basic functions. For women punished alone, the shrew's fiddle prevented them from using their hands, while forcing them to carry the weight of the device around their neck. The fiddle gained popularity in Germanic regions during the 15th and 16th centuries. Town records from Bavaria describe a woman named Greta Müller, who wore the fiddle for 2 days in 1492, after causing disruption in church with her constant complaints about her neighbors. She reportedly fainted several times from the weight of the device, but was revived and forced to continue her sentence. The public display aspect was crucial. Women in the fiddle would be placed in the town square or at the market, where all could see and mock them. Sometimes bells were attached to the fiddle to draw additional attention to the punished woman. In some regions, children were encouraged to throw rotten vegetables at women in the fiddle as an additional layer of humiliation. Court documents from Nuremberg in 1518 mention a couple placed in a double fiddle for 3 market days after disturbing the peace with their constant argument. By the 3rd day, the couple had apparently reconciled, promising the town officials they would live peacefully, likely just to escape the painful device. Number 3. The shame flute. Have you ever played a musical instrument against your will? Medieval women who were considered bad musicians but insisted on performing faced a peculiar punishment called the shame flute. This strange device looked somewhat like a large wooden flute that locked around the neck and hands, forcing the wearer into an uncomfortable position that mimicked playing a flute. The shame flute originated in Germany and Austria around the 14th century, where it was called a Schandflöte. Poor musicians who charged money for their services but played terribly could be punished this way. While this punishment wasn't exclusively for women, historical records show it was disproportionately applied to female musicians and singers who performed publicly. A woman condemned to wear the shame flute would be placed on a platform in the town center, often on market day when crowds were largest. She would stand there for hours, unable to move or adjust the uncomfortable device, while townspeople ridiculed her musical abilities. Sometimes guards would force the punished woman to attempt to sing while wearing the device, which naturally produced distorted, unpleasant sounds that further humiliated her. Records from Vienna in 1461 describe a singer named Helena Brauer, who was placed in the shame flute for deceiving the public with claims of heavenly voice while screeching like a cat in heat. She stood in the marketplace for 6 hours while merchants and customers mocked her. After her punishment, she reportedly never sang publicly again. The shame flute served as a warning to other performers to accurately represent their talents and not charge for services they couldn't properly provide. Towns often kept their shame flute displayed prominently on the town hall or courthouse when not in use, as a visual reminder of the consequences of artistic dishonesty. Number 2. The stocks and pillory. How long could you stay in one position without moving? For medieval women accused of minor crimes, the stocks and pillory provided a painful answer. While these punishments were used for both men and women, certain offenses were considered particularly female, resulting in women being disproportionately punished for marketplace violations, domestic disputes, and moral transgressions. The stocks consisted of wooden boards with holes for the feet, and sometimes hands, forcing the punished person to sit on the ground in an uncomfortable position. The pillory was similar, but required standing, with holes for the head and hands. Women placed in these devices would remain fixed in position for hours or days, exposed to the elements and public ridicule. Women caught selling underweight bread, watered-down ale, or overpriced goods were frequent occupants of the stocks. Court records from 1467 show a London baker named Margaret Crosby spent 3 days in the pillory for selling loaves lacking 2 ounces each. Her hands were secured so she couldn't shield herself when customers she had cheated pelted her with the very bread she had sold them. The punishment wasn't just physically painful. Many women suffered lasting damage to their wrists and ankles from the tight wooden restraints, but the social humiliation could destroy their reputation and livelihood. Being placed in the stocks for even a day could mean losing customers, damaging marriage prospects, or becoming a social outcast. One particularly cruel aspect was the vulnerability of women in these devices. Historical accounts describe women in the stocks being subjected to indecent exposure by passers-by, having their clothes cut or torn, and being unable to defend themselves from unwanted touching or assault. Despite these obvious dangers, town officials rarely provided protection for women serving time in public restraints. A journal from 1525 describes how a woman named Alice Ward was placed in the stocks in Yorkshire for speaking disrespectfully to the parish priest. During her 12-hour confinement, local youths covered her face with mud, cut off portions of her hair, and poured ale over her head. She reportedly developed a fever afterward and died 2 weeks later, though no one was punished for their treatment of her. Number 1. The Walk of Shame. Would you strip down in front of your entire town? For medieval women accused of adultery, prostitution, or other sexual transgressions, the Walk of Shame was a devastating reality. This punishment involved forcing a woman to walk through town, either completely naked or wearing only a thin shift, often while carrying symbols of her alleged crime. The practice appears in records throughout Europe from the 13th to 17th centuries. In some regions, women would be forced to carry heavy stones called stones of shame during their procession. These stones, sometimes shaped suggestively or inscribed with descriptions of their sins, could weigh up to 25 pounds and were typically hung around the neck with chains or rope, adding physical pain to the psychological torture. Records from 1384 describe a married woman in France named Isabeau Martin, who was caught with another man. Her punishment was to walk naked through all main streets of her town for 3 consecutive Sundays, carrying stones painted red to symbolize her sin. Witnesses were required to attend, including her husband and children. After the 3rd walk, she was banished from the town permanently. The Walk of Shame served multiple purposes in medieval society. It punished the individual woman while simultaneously entertaining the crowd and warning other women about the consequences of sexual transgressions. Town officials would announce the upcoming punishment days in advance to ensure large crowds gathered to witness the spectacle. Men were rarely subjected to similar punishments for the same offenses. In some communities, women on their shame walk would be preceded by musicians playing discordant music to draw attention. Bystanders were encouraged to throw mud, rotten food, and feces at the woman as she passed. The entire community's participation in the humiliation reinforced social norms and boundaries around female sexuality and behavior. A particularly well-documented case from 1492 in Bavaria describes how a young woman named Gretchen Müller was forced to walk through town wearing nothing but a crown of straw after being accused of premarital relations. The town records note that she was followed by all children of the village ringing bells and chanting rhymes about her sin. She reportedly threw herself into the river after her punishment, though survived and was then charged with attempted suicide, another sin requiring public penance. Some towns created specific routes for these processions, deliberately passing by the church, marketplace, and the homes of town officials places where the maximum number of witnesses would be present. These paths of shame became so established that some European towns still have streets named shambles or similar terms, marking ancient routes where these processions once occurred. Do we really understand the lasting psychological damage these public humiliations caused to generations of women? Are we certain these medieval practices have completely disappeared from our modern world?